She walked into the restaurant just as the morning sun was rising, casting a soft golden glow over the streets outside. The air was cool, and the faint smell of freshly baked bread and coffee drifted in from the nearby bakery. She pulled her apron tight around her waist, smoothed her hair, and took a deep breath. Another long day awaited her, filled with the constant movement of trays, orders, and polite smiles that sometimes hid frustration or exhaustion. She had been working here for years, quietly, unnoticed by most, except for the occasional nod or brief exchange with the regular customers who had begun to recognize her. The restaurant itself was modest but charming. Wooden tables and chairs filled the room, polished but showing signs of wear. On one side of the dining area, an old piano stood, its black lacquered surface reflecting the light from the hanging lamps above. Most people barely noticed it, thinking of it as part of the decor, a piece of furniture more than an instrument. She, however, could never ignore it. Every time she passed, she felt a small pull in her chest, a memory she tried to keep buried. She had learned to play when she was young, before life had grown complicated and responsibilities had taken over. The piano had once been a place of joy, of freedom, a sanctuary where she could escape the hardships of life. Now, it remained silent, watching over her quiet routine. She moved quickly, greeting the few morning customers with a soft smile and polite words. The smell of eggs and toast filled the air, mixing with the aroma of brewing coffee. She knew the menu by heart, knew which customers liked their coffee black, who preferred extra cream and sugar. It was a routine she could perform with her eyes closed, but even in its familiarity, it could feel exhausting. She carried plates with practiced ease, refilled cups, and balanced the constant demands with a calm she had learned over years of work. The manager, a tall man with a stern face, came around checking on the staff. He nodded at her without much expression, moving on to check the orders in the kitchen. She didn't mind. She had grown used to being overlooked. Her coworkers chatted about weekend plans, small promotions, or personal dramas. She listened sometimes, occasionally contributing a word or two, but mostly she stayed quiet. It was easier this way. Less noise meant less attention. And less attention meant she could continue her work without interference. As the morning rush began to build, the restaurant filled with a mixture of businessmen, tourists, and locals. She moved faster now, weaving through the tables, balancing trays of food and drinks. Every smile she gave was measured, every nod carefully timed. She knew the rules of the space, the invisible boundaries that kept her unnoticed. Some people chatted loudly, oblivious to the small world she inhabited at their feet. Others cast fleeting glances, curious but too polite or too busy to say more than a quick greeting. During a brief lull, she found herself near the piano. Her hands itched and she paused for a moment, resting them on the smooth black keys. They felt familiar, welcoming, almost alive under her touch. She closed her eyes and imagined the music flowing from her fingers, filling the room with sounds that were far richer than the clatter of dishes and murmurs of conversation. For a few seconds, she let herself dream, letting the memories wash over her. There had been a time when she played in front of people who truly listened, who felt the emotions behind every note, but those days had passed, replaced by a life of work and quiet resignation. The bell above the door rang again, signaling the arrival of new customers. She opened her eyes and shook off the momentary reverie. Life demanded her attention now. She moved to greet the newcomers, a family with 2 young children, smiling as she took their order. The children were curious, watching her every move, asking questions about the food and the little sugar packets she handed them. She answered with gentle patience, hiding the exhaustion that sometimes weighed heavily on her shoulders. Each interaction was small, seemingly insignificant, but they were the threads that made up her days. The tiny moments that reminded her she still mattered in some way. By midday, the restaurant was bustling. Plates clattered, glasses chimed, and conversations overlapped in a constant hum. She carried a tray with drinks to a corner table, careful not to spill. As she reached the table, she noticed a man staring toward the piano, a faint smile on his face. He seemed intrigued, his attention caught by the instrument that so often went unnoticed. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a mix of curiosity, fear, and longing. But she said nothing, delivering the drinks with her usual polite demeanor, and moved on. Lunch hour was intense. Orders came rapidly, and the pressure of keeping up with demands made her hands move faster than her thoughts. She balanced plates with precision, refilled water glasses, and offered quick smiles to diners. A young couple complimented the food, and she nodded graciously, thanking them. In moments like this, she felt a quiet satisfaction, the sense of a job well done, even if it went unnoticed by most. She was the invisible thread holding the day together, a small but vital presence. After the rush, she finally had a moment to catch her breath. She leaned against the counter, wiping her hands with a towel, and let her mind wander again to the piano. She imagined her fingers dancing over the keys, the melodies she could play. It was a bittersweet feeling, a reminder of what she had given up and what still lived within her. No one knew, no one asked. She had become adept at hiding her past, at keeping her dreams tucked away beneath layers of practicality and necessity. The afternoon passed slowly, the crowd thinning, leaving only a few lingering customers. She cleared tables methodically, her movements precise and efficient. Every now and then, she would glance at the piano, almost as if it were calling her. She resisted the temptation, focusing instead on the work at hand. Life had taught her to be disciplined, to keep her desires in check, and to find contentment in small victories. Yet the pull of the piano was strong, a quiet reminder of the person she used to be. As the day wore on, she noticed a few regulars who came to the restaurant for the comfort of familiar faces. They exchanged greetings, asked about her day, and shared small stories. She listened, offering words of encouragement when needed, never revealing too much of herself. She had learned that vulnerability could be costly, that the world often overlooked those who quietly carried burdens. And so, she remained reserved, a silent observer in the lives of others, her own story tucked away like a secret melody. Evening approached, and the restaurant took on a different atmosphere. The lighting softened, and a calm settled over the room. She moved with practiced ease, taking orders, serving food, and making sure everything was in place. The piano once again caught her eye. Its black surface gleamed in the dim light, inviting and familiar. She paused briefly, imagining the music she could create, the way it could fill the space and touch the hearts of those around her. But she moved on, knowing that tonight, like every night, her role was to serve, not to perform. As the restaurant began to empty, she found a quiet moment near the piano. The keys called to her, and for a fleeting second, she imagined herself seated, fingers poised, ready to bring the notes to life. It was a comforting thought, a whisper of the dreams she had once held. She smiled faintly, letting the memory linger, before returning to her duties. The night would continue, and with it, the steady rhythm of work and routine. Closing time arrived, and the last customers left, leaving the room silent except for the soft hum of the lights and the occasional clatter of dishes. She began cleaning, wiping tables, stacking chairs, and putting the restaurant in order for the next day. Her movements were deliberate, careful, almost meditative. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to feel the satisfaction of completing another day. The piano waited silently, a patient companion, promising that the music within her was still alive. Even if it remained hidden for now, she finally took a seat near the piano, resting her hands on her lap. The room was quiet, the soft glow of the lamps casting gentle shadows. She closed her eyes and imagined the music again, each note a memory, a dream, a fragment of herself she had carried through years of quiet labor. In that moment, she felt a connection to her past, a reminder that her talent had not disappeared, only waited for the right time. And though the day had been long, filled with the ordinary tasks of serving others, she knew that the music inside her was never truly gone, and that one day it might find its way back into the world. The next day started like any other. With the early sunlight streaming through the windows and casting long, warm shadows on the wooden floors, she arrived at the restaurant carrying her bag and apron and took a deep breath, bracing herself for another busy day. There was a quiet rhythm to her life, a pattern she had followed for years. She moved through the familiar tasks, taking orders, serving drinks, and keeping an eye on the little details that made the restaurant run smoothly. Her coworkers chatted among themselves, excited about the events of the day, while she stayed focused, quietly observing and responding when needed. Around midday, a wave of customers arrived all at once. It was a busy Friday, and the restaurant was packed with people celebrating, laughing, and enjoying their meals. Among them were several well-dressed guests, clearly part of a more affluent crowd. They occupied a corner near the piano, and the chatter grew louder, their voices cutting through the usual hum of the restaurant. She moved among the tables, her hands carrying trays filled with drinks and plates of food, her mind aware of the constant need to balance speed and precision. Every action was deliberate, every smile carefully placed. She had learned to master the art of invisibility. To perform flawlessly while remaining unnoticed, the manager, walking briskly around the dining area, approached her with a tight-lipped expression. He had always been demanding, and his expectations today seemed higher than usual. Without warning, he leaned in and said, almost as a joke, "Why don't you play the piano for them? Show them something interesting." She froze for a moment, shock and fear rushing through her. The room seemed to pause as she looked around, noticing the curious eyes of the wealthy guests who had been chatting and laughing. Her heart raced. She had not played the piano in front of strangers in years. The thought of making a mistake, of being judged, filled her with panic. Her fingers itched to move over the keys, but the anxiety in her chest made them tremble. The manager smirked, expecting her to refuse or falter. Some of her coworkers snickered quietly, thinking it would be amusing to watch her struggle. Swallowing hard, she nodded, forcing herself to stand. She moved toward the piano with hesitant steps, each one heavy with the weight of fear and uncertainty. The guests, noticing her, turned their attention toward her, their chatter slowly quieting. The atmosphere shifted, a mix of curiosity, amusement, and mild anticipation filling the air. She could hear a few whispers, some questioning, some mocking. But she kept her head down and focused on the instrument in front of her as she sat on the bench. She took a moment to breathe, placing her hands on the keys. The black and white surfaces felt familiar, comforting, and yet intimidating. Her mind flashed back to memories of long hours of practice, small triumphs and defeats, of a time when music had been her world. She had loved the piano, but life had demanded sacrifices. Dreams had been set aside, replaced by bills, responsibilities, and the need to survive. Now, faced with an audience that expected nothing from her, she felt the old spark awaken. Her fingers hesitated over the keys, the first notes uncertain and shaky. She felt the eyes of the guests on her, the quiet laughter from the corners of the restaurant. But as she began to play, something unexpected happened. The tremor in her fingers steadied, and the sound that emerged was soft, gentle, and full of emotion. The room fell silent. The clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation faded, replaced by the delicate tones that she coaxed from the piano. Each note carried a story, a memory, a fragment of herself she had long kept hidden. The guests, at first surprised, began to lean in, listening more intently. Their expressions changed from amusement to curiosity, and then two. She lost herself in the music, the nervousness and fear melting away with each melody. Her body relaxed, her movements becoming fluid, graceful, and confident. The piano became an extension of herself, a voice she had forgotten she still possessed. The room, once filled with chatter and laughter, was now captivated by the unexpected beauty flowing from her fingers. Time seemed to stretch. She played without thinking, allowing the music to guide her. Each note reflected her experiences, her struggles, and the quiet strength that had carried her through years of hard work and unseen labor. The wealthy guests were no longer judging her. They were listening, moved by the depth of feeling in her performance. A few of them exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the surprise and talent before them. Even the manager, who had expected humiliation or failure, watched in disbelief, unable to tear his eyes away from the unexpected display of skill. As the final notes lingered in the air, a quiet hush remained. The guests sat in stunned silence, absorbing what they had just heard. Then, slowly, the applause began, soft at first, then growing stronger. People rose from their seats, clapping and cheering, some wiping away small tears of appreciation. She sat there, stunned herself, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. She had expected ridicule or embarrassment, but instead, she had found something she had almost forgotten: recognition, even if only for a fleeting moment. The manager approached, his expression a mixture of surprise and begrudging respect. He offered a small nod, acknowledging the skill he had doubted. Her coworkers stared at her, some in awe, others unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The wealthy guests, still clapping, asked questions, complimenting her talent and expressing amazement that such skill had been hidden in plain sight all these years. She answered politely, her voice calm but tinged with emotion. It was a strange and powerful feeling to have her secret, her gift, recognized so suddenly after the performance. The restaurant returned to its normal rhythm. Though the memory of what had just happened lingered, some customers stayed longer, hoping to hear her play again, while others left with a story to tell about the quiet waitress who had shocked the room with her music. She returned to her duties, carrying trays and taking orders, but something had shifted inside her. The piano was no longer just a silent witness. It had become a part of her day, a reminder of the strength and talent she carried within. Later, during a quiet moment, she found herself near the piano again. Her hands hovered over the keys, the echoes of her performance still fresh in her mind. She imagined what it would be like to play freely, without fear, without judgment. The thought was intoxicating, a glimpse of a life she had once dreamed of, but had set aside. She smiled softly, letting herself savor the feeling, knowing that the world she had always hidden in her heart was still alive and waiting for the right moment. The evening came, and the restaurant slowly emptied. She finished her tasks, cleaning and organizing, her movements slower, reflective. She glanced at the piano one last time before leaving, feeling a quiet connection to the instrument and to the music that had flowed from her. It was more than just talent. It was a part of her identity, a story of resilience, patience, and the quiet courage it took to face fear and emerge with beauty. As she walked home that night, the cool air brushing against her face, she replayed the day in her mind. She had been forced into a situation that should have been humiliating, but instead, it had become a moment of triumph, a revelation of her hidden self. She felt a renewed sense of possibility, a spark that had lain dormant for far too long. She knew that her life would continue with its daily routines, its work and obligations, but something fundamental had changed. The music inside her had found its voice again, and with it, a sense of hope and excitement for what might come next. The following day, she arrived at the restaurant with the usual mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The memory of the previous day's unexpected performance lingered in her mind like a dream she could hardly believe. She walked in, adjusted her apron, and took a deep breath, trying to settle the fluttering in her chest. Today felt different. There was a sense of possibility in the air, a quiet tension that made her heart beat faster. She moved through the familiar routine of greeting the early customers and taking orders, but every step felt heavier with thought and lighter with hope. The restaurant seemed ordinary, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. By mid-morning, the restaurant began filling up again. But today, a small group of new faces sat near the piano. They were elegantly dressed, clearly guests, with a love for the finer things, and their conversation carried the faint undertone of curiosity. She felt a flicker of anxiety as she approached their table with a tray of drinks, aware that they might remember her from yesterday. Their eyes followed her carefully, polite but sharp, and she wondered if they were silently questioning who this quiet waitress could be. She smiled, keeping her posture straight and her movements careful. Answering their questions about the menu with calm assurance, the manager appeared again, his gaze lingering on her longer than usual. He didn't speak, but his presence carried an unspoken weight. She sensed he was still processing what had happened the day before. The other staff members whispered quietly amongst themselves, exchanging glances, some full of awe, some full of disbelief. The energy in the room shifted subtly, a mixture of curiosity and expectation building quietly beneath the surface. She focused on her tasks, serving food, taking orders. and maintaining the flow of the restaurant, all while keeping a careful eye on the guests near the piano. When the lunch rush began, the restaurant filled with the usual clamor of plates, conversations, and the clinking of glasses. She moved quickly, balancing trays, refilling drinks, and clearing tables with practiced precision. Yet her thoughts drifted back to the piano and the unexpected joy she had felt when the music had flowed from her hands. She remembered the quiet awe in the eyes of the guests and the feeling of freedom, even amidst the fear. It had been a moment of pure, unfiltered connection, and she longed to feel that again. But she also knew the reality. She was a waitress, and this was her life for now. Measured in small steps, quiet smiles, and hard work. Around mid-afternoon, the restaurant was quieter. A few guests lingered over dessert, enjoying the calm after the lunch rush. She found herself near the piano, unable to resist the pull. Her fingers hovered over the keys, her mind filled with memories of lessons, practice sessions, and the long hours she had spent perfecting her craft. Each note seemed to call to her, whispering reminders of the person she had been and the talent she still carried. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that no one would force her today, and that she could choose when to play. The thought of freedom in her music, even if brief, gave her a sense of calm she had not felt in years as she contemplated the keys. She noticed the wealthy guests watching her with keen interest. Their eyes were curious, not mocking. They seemed to sense the connection she had with the piano, the unspoken story it held. She hesitated, her heart pounding, unsure whether to give in to the temptation or step away. But the pull was too strong, and with a careful glance around to ensure the moment was private enough, she began to play. The first notes were tentative, soft, testing the waters, but soon the music grew richer, more confident. The melodies flowed naturally, as if her hands remembered what her mind had sometimes forgotten. The room fell silent. The ordinary sounds of the restaurant fading into the background. The guests listened intently, captivated by the music that seemed to tell a story without words. She played with feeling, letting the notes express the emotions she often kept hidden, the struggles, the long hours, the dreams deferred, and the quiet hope that had never left her. Each chord resonated deeply, filling the space with warmth, sadness, and joy all at once. It was as if the piano had become her voice, telling a story she had never shared aloud. Time seemed suspended as she played, unaware of the minutes passing. She lost herself in the music, each note a thread connecting her past to the present, her fears to her courage. She felt a rare sense of liberation, a moment where nothing else existed but the sound of her own hands bringing life to the piano. The wealthy guests were no longer just observers. They were witnesses to something intimate and extraordinary, a secret world that had finally been revealed. Their eyes shone with admiration, and a few whispered quietly, moved by the depth of her performance. When the final notes faded into the air, the silence lingered, heavy with awe and wonder. The guests leaned back, their expressions a mixture of surprise, admiration, and quiet respect. Then, gradually, the applause began. It was soft at first, cautious, then grew louder, more insistent, a wave of appreciation that seemed to fill the room. She sat there, hands resting on the keys, breathing heavily, overwhelmed by the unexpected response. The feeling was foreign yet exhilarating, a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. She had faced her fear and created something beautiful, and the world had noticed. The manager approached, his usual stern expression softened by genuine surprise. He didn't speak immediately, but the nod he gave her carried unspoken acknowledgement. Her coworkers looked on, some with admiration, some with astonishment, unsure how to respond to the talent they had never suspected. The guests asked questions, eager to know more about the young woman who could transform an ordinary restaurant into a space filled with music and emotion. She answered politely, careful not to overstate herself. Yet there was a quiet pride in her voice that hadn't been there before. After the performance, she returned to her duties, but everything felt changed. The restaurant still hummed with its usual activity, but the energy was different, lighter, filled with the lingering echo of music. The guests seemed more engaged, some staying longer just to watch her work. others discussing the unexpected performance among themselves. She moved among the tables with ease, carrying trays and serving food. Yet every glance at the piano reminded her of the extraordinary moment that had just occurred. It was a quiet triumph, a validation of something she had carried within her for so long. As the evening approached, the restaurant began to empty. She took a moment to sit near the piano, letting her hands hover over the keys. The room was quiet, and the soft glow of the lamps created gentle shadows on the walls. She remembered the expressions of the guests, the surprise, the awe, and the quiet respect she had earned. It was a reminder that her talent had not vanished, that the years of practice and dedication had not been wasted. She closed her eyes and imagined the music flowing freely, without hesitation or fear, and felt a sense of calm and satisfaction. Later, as she cleaned and organized the restaurant, her thoughts lingered on the piano and the unexpected opportunity it had provided. She realized that her life, though filled with daily routines and responsibilities, was capable of moments of extraordinary beauty. The music within her was still alive, waiting for the right moment to be heard again. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet determination that, no matter the circumstances, she would not let her talent remain hidden forever. Walking home that night, the cool breeze against her face brought a sense of clarity and peace. The city lights reflected softly on the pavement, and she felt a connection to the world around her that was deeper than usual. She knew that her life would continue with its familiar patterns, but the music had reminded her of something essential, that even in the most ordinary circumstances, extraordinary moments could emerge. She carried the memory of the day with her, a reminder that courage, skill, and passion could transform fear into beauty, and that her piano, silent for so long, had become a voice she could no longer ignore. The day started quietly, with the soft light of morning spilling into the streets and warming the entrance of the restaurant. She arrived, carrying her bag and apron, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and unease. Yesterday had changed something inside her, though she couldn't yet put it into words. The applause, the recognition, the faces of the guests who had listened intently, it all lingered in her mind like a melody she couldn't stop humming. She moved through the restaurant with practiced efficiency, greeting the early customers, refilling drinks and clearing tables. Yet, beneath the ordinary tasks, a quiet excitement stirred. By late morning, the restaurant was filling up with a mix of regulars and new visitors. She moved among the tables, taking orders and serving food with the ease of someone who had done this job for years. Yet her eyes kept wandering to the piano, and she felt the familiar tug of longing. It was a constant presence in her life, a reminder of the music she had loved and the years she had put aside to survive. She paused briefly, brushing her fingers lightly over the keys, letting herself imagine the sound once more. The feeling was intoxicating, a mixture of nostalgia, hope, and longing. Then something unexpected happened. A man who had been in the restaurant the previous day approached her. He was well-dressed, with a calm presence and a kind but curious expression. He spoke softly, asking if she had formal training in music. She paused, taken aback by the question. Her voice caught for a moment, and then she answered honestly, telling him she had trained for years as a child, but had stopped due to life's demands. He listened intently, nodding as she spoke, his eyes reflecting genuine interest rather than judgment. There was something different about him, a recognition she had never felt from anyone before. He explained that he was connected to a music academy in the city, had attended the restaurant yesterday only by chance. He had been moved by her playing, captivated not just by the skill but by the emotion she had conveyed. He wanted to offer her an opportunity to perform, to share her talent in a setting where it could be appreciated fully. She felt a rush of disbelief and nervousness, mixed with a flicker of hope. The idea of stepping into a world she had left behind for so long was overwhelming, but also exhilarating. It was a chance she had never imagined possible. The manager, noticing the conversation, approached with his usual stern expression. He had been expecting her to be embarrassed, or perhaps even fail again, but he watched as the man spoke to her, his eyes narrowing with curiosity and something resembling surprise. The other staff members paused, unsure how to react, some whispering quietly to each other. She listened to the man's offer, her heart pounding, her mind racing with questions and fears. Could she really return to that world of music? Would she be able to face audiences outside the familiar safety of the restaurant? And yet, beneath the anxiety, a spark of excitement grew. Throughout the afternoon, the restaurant continued its usual rhythm, but she moved through it with a different sense of purpose. Orders were taken, plates carried, drinks poured, but the piano loomed in her mind as more than just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol, a bridge between the life she had been living and the possibilities now opening before her. Her fingers itched to play, to explore the music that had waited patiently for her return. She imagined the sound of a larger audience, the resonance of the notes filling a hall, and the thought brought both fear and anticipation. The wealthy guests from previous days lingered, noticing the subtle change in her demeanor. They had come to expect the quiet, polite waitress, and now they saw a spark of confidence, a sense of hidden depth. A few approached her, complimenting her music and expressing curiosity about her past. She answered carefully, her words simple and honest, not wanting to boast, but also not wanting to hide. It was strange to feel recognized not just for her service, but for her talent, and the attention was both thrilling and intimidating. By late afternoon, the man from the music academy returned, inviting her to sit down with him for a more serious conversation. She agreed, her heart racing with anticipation. He explained that he wanted to mentor her, to help her develop her skills and bring her music to a larger audience. He spoke of opportunities, small at first, and then gradually larger where her talent could shine. She listened carefully, weighing the possibilities against the reality of her life. It was a difficult choice, fraught with uncertainty, but also filled with promise, as she considered his offer. She reflected on the years she had spent in quiet service, on the sacrifices she had made, and on the dreams she had set aside. There had been times of doubt, moments when she had wondered if she had wasted her talent, if the music she loved would ever have a voice again. Now, faced with a real opportunity, she felt a mixture of fear, hope, and determination. It was a turning point, a moment where she could step out of the shadows and into the light. The evening came, and the restaurant emptied, leaving a calm stillness. She took a moment to sit near the piano, letting her hands hover over the keys. She imagined the performance she could give, the notes flowing freely, and the joy it would bring. It was a private moment, a meditation on what could be, and it filled her with a sense of calm and clarity. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be challenges and fears to face, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to embrace them. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. She balanced her work at the restaurant with brief practice sessions, gradually allowing herself to rediscover the music that had been dormant for so long. Each day, the piano became less of a symbol of the past and more of a companion, a reminder of her strength, skill, and resilience. She found herself playing longer, experimenting with new melodies, and feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The music was no longer just a memory. It was alive, dynamic, and full of possibility. Throughout this time, the restaurant continued its usual rhythm, but she moved through it with a sense of quiet confidence. Customers noticed a subtle change in her demeanor, a calmness that came from knowing she was reclaiming a part of herself. Her coworkers, too, began to see her differently, not just as a hard-working waitress, but as someone with depth and talent. The manager, still watching closely, seemed to develop a grudging respect, though his pride made it hard to express openly. One afternoon, the man from the music academy returned with an invitation. He had arranged for a small, private performance at a local event, a place where she could play for an audience that would appreciate her skill and give her honest feedback. She felt a mixture of fear and excitement. This was her chance to step beyond the walls of the restaurant, to share her music with people who truly understood its value. She accepted, her heart racing with anticipation, knowing that this could mark the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The day of the performance arrived, and she prepared herself with care. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the piano, but she took deep breaths, grounding herself in the memories of past lessons and the emotions that had carried her through years of quiet labor. The audience was small, but attentive, their eyes focused on her as she settled onto the bench. She placed her fingers on the keys, closed her eyes for a moment, and let the first notes flow. The music filled the room, soft at first, then gradually swelling with emotion and depth. Each note carried a piece of her story, a reflection of the struggles, sacrifices, and dreams that had shaped her. The audience listened in rapt attention, moved by the skill and feeling in her performance. There was no laughter, no mockery, only quiet appreciation and occasional murmurs of admiration. She played with a freedom she had not felt in years, allowing the music to guide her and the emotions to flow naturally. The piano became an extension of herself, a voice through which she could express the complexities of her journey. When the final notes faded, the silence lingered for a moment, and then applause erupted. Heartfelt and genuine, she rose from the bench, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. The audience approached her, asking questions, complimenting her talent, and expressing their admiration. She answered politely, yet each interaction carried a sense of connection she had rarely experienced. The man from the Music Academy smiled, nodding in approval, and the feeling of validation washed over her. For the first time in a long time, she realized that her talent, her passion, and her dedication had not been forgotten. They had only been waiting for the right moment to shine. The morning sun spilled softly over the streets as she prepared for another day. But this day felt unlike any other. There was a quiet excitement in the air, a sense of possibility she had not felt in years. Her journey from the shy, unnoticed waitress to a pianist with growing recognition had transformed something inside her. She tied her apron with deliberate care, adjusted her hair, and breathed deeply, preparing herself for the path that lay ahead. The restaurant still awaited her, with its familiar smells, sounds, and rhythms. But now it was the backdrop to a life she was beginning to reclaim. The day started with her usual tasks, greeting early customers, taking orders, and serving food with practiced ease. Yet her mind was elsewhere, reflecting on the small private performance she had given recently. It had been a turning point, a taste of the world she had left behind, a reminder that her talent could touch others, that her music had a voice. As she moved among the tables, she noticed the subtle changes in the way people looked at her. Customers who had once overlooked her now glanced with curiosity or admiration, sensing a quiet confidence she had never carried before. Even her coworkers seemed to regard her differently, some with surprise, others with newfound respect. By mid-morning, a familiar figure appeared in the restaurant, the man from the Music Academy who had first recognized her talent. He greeted her warmly and asked about her progress, excited to share the news of an upcoming opportunity. A local event, larger than the previous one, was seeking performers, and he had recommended her. The thought of performing for a larger audience both thrilled and terrified her. It was a step further into a world she had left behind, a world filled with expectations and the pressure to shine. She hesitated, wondering if she was ready. But the memory of the piano's keys under her fingers and the emotion of her music reminded her that she could rise to the challenge. The manager approached, observing the exchange. His expression was neutral, but carried a hint of curiosity. He had witnessed the change in her over the past days, from a quiet, unassuming waitress to someone who carried herself with subtle confidence. He asked quietly if she had considered performing again, and she nodded, her voice steady but soft. The acknowledgement from him, however slight, felt significant, a recognition of the growth and strength she had cultivated. She returned to her duties, moving among tables with grace. But her mind was alive with anticipation of what was to come. As the day progressed, she found small moments to practice in the quiet spaces of the restaurant. The piano had become more than an object. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and possibility. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, experimenting with melodies, testing the emotions that had long lived inside her. Each note reminded her of the struggles she had endured, the sacrifices she had made, and the dreams that had been deferred. Yet it also reminded her of her strength, her persistence, and the talent that had survived despite years of neglect. Music had been a companion through loneliness and hardship, and now it was a guiding force toward a new chapter. The afternoon brought a flurry of customers. She moved with practiced precision, taking orders, serving plates and refilling glasses. Yet her focus remained divided, part of her immersed in the present and part in preparation for the upcoming performance. She imagined the audience, the venue, and the way her music would carry across the room. The thought was both exhilarating and daunting, but it reminded her that she had earned this chance through years of quiet dedication. She was no longer just the waitress who served food. She was a musician reclaiming her voice. By early evening, she had finished her shift at the restaurant and walked home, her mind buzzing with possibilities. She reflected on how far she had come. From the timid girl who had avoided attention to someone ready to embrace her talent fully, the city lights reflected softly on the pavement as she made her way through familiar streets, feeling a sense of connection and anticipation. Each step carried her closer to a future she had only dared to imagine, and the excitement mingled with a quiet sense of responsibility. She knew that every note she played would matter, not just to herself, but to those who would listen and feel the music in their own hearts. In the days leading to the performance, she balanced her work at the restaurant with intense practice sessions. Her hands moved across the keys with renewed confidence, exploring melodies, harmonies, and rhythms that had long been dormant. Each session was a journey, a rediscovery of her voice, her emotions, and her connection to the music. The piano became a partner in her transformation, guiding her, challenging her, and encouraging her to take risks. She experimented with compositions she had once loved, incorporating new ideas and personal touches that reflected her growth and experience. Finally, the day of the performance arrived. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were simple yet elegant, reflecting her personality without overwhelming her presence. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the piano at the venue, a mix of nerves and excitement coursing through her. The audience was larger than she had ever imagined, a sea of faces filled with curiosity and anticipation. She took a deep breath, grounding herself in the memories of past lessons and the journey that had brought her here. She sat at the piano, her fingers poised over the keys, and closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself in the music that had always been her refuge. The first notes flowed tentatively, soft and careful, testing the space and the attention of the audience. Then gradually the music grew stronger, more expressive, and filled the room with emotion. She played with feeling, allowing each note to tell a story of perseverance, courage, and hope. The audience listened intently, captivated by the depth of emotion and skill she conveyed. There was a profound silence as the music washed over them, a shared experience that transcended words. Her performance was more than just technique. It was a testament to the human spirit, the power of resilience, and the beauty of following one's passion despite obstacles. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of silence, as if the audience was savoring the experience before responding. Then, applause erupted, heartfelt and enthusiastic, filling the venue with appreciation. She rose from the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, overwhelmed by the response. The audience approached, offering compliments, asking questions, and expressing admiration for her courage and talent. She smiled, responding with humility and gratitude, yet inside, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was more than recognition. It was validation of her journey, her dedication, and her ability to transform fear into beauty. The man from the music academy approached her once more, his expression filled with pride and encouragement. He spoke of further opportunities, larger stages, and ways to continue developing her talent. She listened, her heart swelling with anticipation and determination. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and expectations, but she felt ready to face them. She had discovered a strength within herself, courage that had been nurtured through years of quiet labor and personal sacrifice. She realized that her music was not just a talent, but a voice, a way to connect, inspire, and touch lives. After the performance, she returned to the restaurant, where her coworkers and the manager greeted her with curiosity and admiration. The atmosphere was changed. They now saw her not only as a dedicated worker, but as someone with depth, talent, and resilience. She moved among the tables, serving with the same care and precision as always. Yet there was a new lightness in her step, a confidence that radiated quietly. The restaurant, once the center of her ordinary life, had become a backdrop to the extraordinary journey she was undertaking. In the following weeks, her life began to change. Invitations to perform came more frequently, and she balanced these opportunities with her work at the restaurant. Each performance strengthened her confidence, honed her skills, and connected her with audiences who appreciated her music. Yet she never lost her humility or the quiet grace that had defined her character. She remained grounded, aware of the effort, patience, and perseverance that had carried her to this point. The piano, once a silent witness to her hidden talent, had become her companion, her voice, and her bridge to the world.